Now settle in and listen close. This is a story about a man who thought he could outsmart death itself. And oh, how he tried. The land was sick. Terribly, horribly sick. The plague they called the Red Death had been moving through the countryside like a slow and patient fire. Through villages, through cities, through the homes of the humble and the grand alike. It left its mark on those it touched. Scarlet stains upon the skin. A sudden dizziness. Then darkness. From the first shudder to the last, it took less than half an hour. Merciless in its swiftness, merciless in its reach. But there was a prince, Prince Prospero, they called him. A man of great wealth and, some would say, greater arrogance. He looked out at the suffering world and decided, very simply, that it was not his problem. Not anymore. He gathered 1,000 of his favorite companions, lords and ladies, all of them healthy, all of them privileged, and he led them behind the thick iron gates of his abbey, deep in the countryside. The gates were welded shut. The walls were high. Provisions were plentiful. And he said, in so many words, "Let the world outside burn. In here we shall be safe. In here we shall be merry." Now, this abbey, it was no ordinary shelter. Prince Prospero had a taste for the theatrical, for the strange and the sumptuous, and the rooms he'd arranged for his great masquerade reflected that taste beautifully. There were 7 rooms, each one flowing into the next, arranged in a long and winding suite. But here was the peculiarity. Each room was dressed in a single color. The first room glowed in blue, its windows a deep cerulean. Then came purple, then green, then orange, then white, then violet. 6 rooms, each strange and beautiful in its own way, each lit by a fire burning behind stained glass, so that the very air inside seemed to hold the color, seemed to breathe it. And then there was the 7th room. The 7th room was draped entirely in black, black velvet on the walls, black velvet cascading from the ceiling. But its windows were a deep, deep scarlet, blood red. And in this room stood a great ebony clock, tall and somber against the wall. Its pendulum swung with a heavy, deliberate tick. When it struck the hour, the sound was so deep, so resonant, so strange, that even the music would falter, even the dancers would pause, even the laughter would quiet for just a moment. Most of the guests, you understand, preferred to linger in the other 6 rooms. They did not much care for the 7th. For 5 months, they lived behind those walls. 5 months of safety, of plenty, of deliberately not thinking about what lay beyond the gates. And when the 6th month came, Prince Prospero announced his great masquerade. Oh, it was a spectacle. The guests came dressed in costumes of every wild and wonderful variety, glittering and grotesque, beautiful and bizarre. There were jesters and phantoms. There were peacocks and skeletons. There were figures draped in silk and figures draped in rags deliberately torn for effect. The music was bright and relentless. The wine flowed freely. Through 6 of the 7 rooms, the revelers moved and laughed and danced, the colored light of each chamber painting them in blue, in purple, in green. This was Prospero's gift to his companions. This was his declaration to the waiting world outside. We are not afraid. We have music. We have fire. We have each other. Death may stand at the gates, but inside these walls, tonight, we are alive. And they believed him. Why wouldn't they? The walls were thick. The gates were sealed. The night was young. and the music was so very, very lovely. It is easy to believe in safety when everything around you has been arranged precisely to encourage the belief. Easy, that is, until the clock strikes. Midnight came slowly, as midnights do when you are not quite ready for them. The great ebony clock in the 7th room began to strike. 1, 2, 3. The music faltered as it always did. The laughter softened. 4, 5, 6. The dancers slowed and something uneasy moved through the crowd, some instinct older than manners or revelry. 7, 8, 9. And it was then, in that hush, in that held breath between the notes, that people began to notice the figure. It moved through the crowd like smoke, tall, gaunt, dressed in the garments of the grave, a shroud, or something very like one, spattered with what appeared to be the unmistakable crimson of the Red Death. The mask upon its face was fashioned to resemble a corpse in the final stages of the plague. The scarlet stains were rendered with horrifying fidelity. The face, if you could call it a face, was rigid and gray as a death mask. 10, 11, 12. Silence. At first there was only stillness, then a slow, spreading horror, like cold water rising. Who would dare? Who among them would dare wear such a costume to such a gathering, in such a time as this? The guests drew back, and Prince Prospero, his face darkening with fury rather than fear, followed the figure's slow procession toward the 7th room. Now here is where Prospero's pride becomes his undoing, because a wiser man might have let the figure go. A wiser man might have looked at that dreadful costume and felt something colder than anger, felt, perhaps, a warning. But Prospero was not a man accustomed to being defied, not in his own home, not in his own fortress. He strode through room after room in furious pursuit, through blue, through purple, through green, through orange, through white, through violet, while his guests hung back, too frightened to follow, too frightened to speak. The music had died entirely now. The 7th room waited ahead, draped in its black velvet, lit in its scarlet light. The figure had stopped at the far end of the room, standing before the great ebony clock, and it turned to face him. Prospero raised the dagger he had drawn. His voice rang out across the silence, and then he fell. A single sharp cry, and then the prince lay upon the floor of the 7th room. The dagger dropped beside him, and the laughter and the music and the warmth of 5 months all went with him in a single, terrible instant. From every doorway now, the bravest guests came rushing forward, desperate and furious, reaching for the figure, seizing hold of it, and the shroud, the mask, the vestments of death collapsed inward. There was nothing inside. One by one, the candles guttered out. One by one, the fires behind the stained glass windows grew dim and cold. And one by one, like lights being gently extinguished at the end of a long evening, the revelers fell where they stood. In the blue room, in the purple, in the green, in the orange, in the white, in the violet, and in the black room beside the clock, whose pendulum had finally stilled. The Red Death had been among them all evening, had walked their corridors, had breathed their air, had watched them dance and laugh and pretend the world outside was no concern of theirs. No gate could keep it out, no wall, no wealth, no masquerade however grand. And so the abbey fell dark and silent, and the great gates remained sealed. And outside, the world went on as the world does, indifferent, enduring, patient as the tide. Now, story away somewhere close and warm, the way you tug a coal deeper into the fire. Because Poe wasn't trying to frighten us, not really. He was reminding us, gently, and in his own extraordinary way, that no one gets to opt out of being mortal. Not for love, not for money, not for the thickest walls ever built. We are all, every one of us, guests at the masquerade. Best to dance well while the music plays.